study viewing his life in 3 sections, from the point where he was anointed to be king in the midst of his brethren in his father's house, to where he slew Goliath, became commander of the army. That's one kind of section of his life. And then we know that from that point, from when he became commander of the army, King Saul became jealous of him, sought to kill him 21 different times. There's 21 different incidences of Saul trying to kill David. And over the next 10 years or so, David is a fugitive. So that's another section of his life, between Saul's jealousy and David having to become a fugitive. Is another section of his life, and that's what I want to focus on here with 1 Samuel 27. And then, of course, after he's a fugitive, he becomes king, and that's a whole other 40-year section of his life. And I've asked Pastor Glenn to do something about that next week. So in the time that David is a fugitive, there's all kinds of great examples and places where we can find attributes of leadership in his life. But I want to focus on a period of time during that fugitive period that has always fascinated me. And we begin to read in first, I'm going to have to skip around, so I want to cover a couple of chapters. This is deep into David having been a fugitive from Saul. He's lived out in the wilderness. They've got wives and children, 600 men, so he's got all these people that he's responsible for, plus the pressure of various occasions when Saul sends armies after him. And so after years of this, something snaps in David. That's how I would describe what happens in 1 Samuel chapter 27, and it happens in life because of pressures, circumstances, long-term needs that are unmet. I've watched a lot of men snap and make bad decisions that put their destiny in jeopardy. Remember, David has been anointed to be king, but what's happening here, he's forgotten about that. That's no longer on the landscape or on the vision of his life. He's not thinking about that anymore. He's got this incredible destiny. People are saying that one day you're going to be king. Remember, Abigail said, you're going to be king one day, but at this juncture, he is so overwhelmed and dominated with this long-term circumstance, a fugitive. Imagine the responsibility. 600 men plus wives and children. There could have been 3,000 people that are, having to live in the rough, having to face an army. He's got to feed them. He's responsible for them. He's their leader. They've committed loyalty to him. They're enduring hardship and sacrifice to be aligned with David. But as I said, something snapped. He made a bad decision, and we find that in the first few verses here of chapter 27. Look at it with me. And David said in his heart, "Now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul." So when you're desperate, you start drawing wrong conclusions that make bad decisions seem logical. Right? That's what's happening here. So he's already determined, I can't beat Saul. One day he's going to get me. That's what he's saying. So he's not thinking about being king at all. He's only thinking that Saul is going to get him one day. And then it goes on, "There's nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines. Saul will despair of me to seek me any more in any part of Israel, so I shall escape out of his hand." And David arose, went over with 600 men who were with him to Achish, son of Moab, king of Gath. So David dwelt with Achish at Gath, he and his men, each man with his household, so they've all got families. And David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's widow. And it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he sought him no more. All good, right? goes to the king and says, look, why don't you give me a city to dwell in? And so he does, gives him Ziklag that belonged to the, for why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you? Therefore, so Achish gave him Ziklag that day. So he gave him a village with houses and orchards and lands all around. They're safe and they're secure. Saul can't chase them down anymore. And so it looks, and I can't tell you how weary I get when I hear men rationalizing what I know is a bad decision. Happens all the time in discipleship. And so here's David. He's aligned with the Philistines. Remember who the Philistines are. They are enemies of Israel. They want the destruction of Israel. Goliath was a Philistine. David has gone to war with the Philistines and killed thousands of them over the many years of his oversight. And these are the enemies. And so his mind, as I said, snaps under the pressure of being a fugitive from Saul. And he starts rationalizing what we can see is a very bad and very unwise decision, but it works. His bad decision bears fruit and gave him what he wanted. He has rest from Saul. Saul's not going to go into the land of the Philistines to chase after him. That would, give him two fronts. He'd have to, first of all, defeat the Philistines in order to get to David. So David is safe. Safe from Saul, safe from living in the rough. He now has a village that is his hometown. They are occupying homes and they're living really in the lap of luxury. They can do as they please. They have wealth, they have resources, they have food, they have everything they need. They're comfortable, they're secure, and they're safe. And this very bad decision is working for him. Then the inevitable happens. In chapter 28, two things happen on parallel tracks. The Philistines go to war with Israel, and this is also the chapter where Saul consulted the medium and sealed his fate. Now it happened in verse 1 of chapter 28. Now it happened in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies for war to fight with Israel. And Achish said to David, you assuredly know that you will go out with me to battle, you and your men. And David said to Achish, surely you know what your servant can do. And Achish said to David, therefore I will make you one of my chief guardians forever. So think about this. David is now going to align himself with the Philistines to go into battle against Israel. So he is not thinking of being king anymore. That's gone. That's eliminated. And I watched men under pressure, in the framework of unmet needs, they forget all about their calling. All about what's in the best interest of their destiny and their calling. That's no longer on the landscape. What's on the landscape is I have this immediate need, and this decision is going to meet that need. And then it does. It all works out. David's bad decision bore fruit, gave him what he wanted. Imagine how they felt living in normal houses, having a town, a city, a village that they can call their home. And now, he's aligning himself. He wants to go to war with the Philistines against Israel. So that part of the narrative stops in verse 2. And then in verse 3, Samuel's died. Saul is scared of the Philistines. He's trying to get the mind of God. God's not talking to him. So he goes to a witch. And the witch prophesies, it's over for you, buddy. You're going to die. And then we go back to the other narrative in the beginning of chapter 29 of David aligning himself with the Philistines. And so before they go into war, the Philistine generals or leaders are reviewing the troops as they normally do. The troops are lined up by the thousands upon thousands, and the generals are reviewing them, and then all of a sudden they come upon David and the Hebrews. Achish likes him. Achish and David have had this alliance, and Achish is apparently king or leader of a certain district in the land of the Philistines. And so Achish gives David permission to line up with the army to go to war against Israel. But when the Philistine generals, those that are over Achish, see the Hebrews, they don't like this scene at all. In other words, they see it for what it is. And they request or require or command that these Hebrews be sent away, and David is upset. He wants to go to war with Israel. Who knows what's driving that now? Who knows bitterness? Vengeance against Saul? You know, you think about how wars were fought in those days. It's hand-to-hand combat. You're going to stick people with the edge of your sword. This is not, you know, shooting from a mile away or dropping bombs from an F-16. This is hand-to-hand combat with your brethren. You're willing to go to war, and you're willing to do that. So as I said, this isn't a man who's marching toward his destiny, who's thinking in terms of what's going to be best for my calling. There are things that are best short-term, perhaps, and then there are things that are best long-term in order to facilitate your calling. And sometimes you've got to pay a price and sacrifice short-term in order to achieve your destiny and achieve your calling. And so the Philistines are upset with Achish. And in verse 4 it says, the princes of the Philistines were angry. So the princes of the Philistines said to Achish, make this fellow return, that he may go back to the place which you have appointed for him. Do not let him go down with us to battle. So they don't want any part of David. They remember, and they said in verse 5, is this not David, of whom they sang to one another in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Well, those thousands and 10,000s were Philistines. And these generals remember this guy. Achish called David, verse 6, and said, surely as the Lord lives, you've been upright, and you're going out and you're coming in with me, and the army is good in my sight. For to this day I have not found evil in you since the day of your coming to me. Nevertheless, the Lords do not favor you. Verse 8, so David said to Achish, but what have I done? In other words, he didn't like this. He wants to go to war with the Philistines against Israel. And to this day, what have you found in your servant as long as I've been with you, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my Lord the king? As I said, destiny's not on his mind. And then Achish answered and said to David, I know that you are as good in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the princes of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up with us to battle. So David's rejected, and this is, now we're in chapter 30. He goes back to his hometown, Ziklag, and the time that he was away from Ziklag with his army to align with the Philistines, his hometown was attacked by the Amalekites. They burned it to the ground. They took their wives and their children into captivity. That's what David comes back to. Chapter 30, verse 3. David and his men came to the city, and there it was, burned with fire. Their wives, their sons, their daughters had been taken captive. David and the people who were with him lifted up their voices and wept. David's wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess and Abigail, had been taken captive. Verse 6. Now we're going to see David begin the trek back to normalcy. David was greatly distressed. People spoke of stoning him because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and his daughters. But David strengthened or encouraged himself in the Lord and his God, then said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod here to me. And Abiathar brought the ephod. So David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this troop? Shall I overtake them? And the Lord answered. We don't find David praying. The whole time he's with the Philistines, praying. For now, who knows? We don't get the backstory of what he's thinking and feeling other than what we read in the text. But what we see here is a turn. Back to God, back to prayer, back to his guidance, back to to his direction. This is one of the great stories of victory. David pursues the Amalekites, defeats them in battle, and they recover everything. Not one of their wives or children was harmed. They got all of their goods back, and the Bible says that they recovered all. So that is occurring. I think we're seeing here a shift in David's heart. Now his destiny can come back into the picture, and it was in the very battle that he wanted to go to fight against Israel in, that Saul and his 3 sons are killed in that battle. Imagine if David had been with the Philistines when that had happened. You know, Saul had a large following. He had a lot of loyal men and troops that were faithful to him. David had to contend with them after he became king. Remember, the Bible says that the house of David became stronger and stronger. The house of Saul became weaker and weaker. That was after David was king, and he's having to contend with them. So, you know, it's one thing for Saul to be killed in battle. It would be another thing for David to be aligned with the army of the Philistines, but he wasn't. And so let's draw just a few conclusions here. Number one conclusion is God's will for your life doesn't change even if you make bad decisions. You may be making it harder on yourself. You may be prolonging the ordeal of advancing God's will in your life. But God, even though David, at least temporarily, gave up on the destiny that God had for his life, it's very apparent that God didn't give up on the destiny that he had for David's life, even though God is observing him. You know, do what God said don't do. He's aligning with the Philistines, the enemies of Israel. They're pagans, they're heathens, they worship false gods, they're unclean, they're immoral, they're murderous and violent. I mean, every adjective that you can think of in the negative is assigned to the Philistines. And so God is watching David do this, but doesn't give up on the destiny that God has for David's life. And it isn't very long after, we're at the very end now. Chapter 31 is the battle where Saul is killed. And then the Bible goes into the book of 2 Samuel, where David is anointed and becomes king. So it doesn't take very long for this to be recovered. When David's heart shifts, he inquires of the Lord. Saul is killed in battle. All the circumstances are now in place for David to be elevated to become king, and he is. I mean, you don't see that happening. If you were to see only David's alliance with the Philistines, only him lining up with the army to fight against Israel, you would have thought this guy is not going to become king anytime soon, but he did become king very soon after that. Things can shift and change when you change. And so, I'm not advocating making bad decisions. All I'm saying is that disciples and leaders can make bad decisions. We can make decisions that are contrary to our calling. It's not advisable. It's not healthy. It's not wise. And you're running a great risk when you do that. Not every situation, I don't think, is going to play out like David's did. You could make a bad decision, not in the interest of your calling and destiny, and you can write yourself out of the script. That could be a possibility. Not every situation works out like David's did. But I can see the hand of God here. Even though he goes into the land of the Philistines, God is protecting the interests of his will in David's life. It could very well be the Spirit of the Lord is at work, causing the rejection of David out of the army of Israel. God then intervenes as David's request, tells him to go pursue the Amalekites, and he does, and circumstances start falling into place. Saul is killed in battle. David is anointed king in chapter 2 of 2 Samuel in the city of Hebron. He reigns there for 7 years and then moves the capital city to Jerusalem, and on goes his future and his destiny. So there's the story. That story is always fascinating. When I get to it twice a year in my Bible reading, I read it with vigor. Even though I've read it many dozens of times. There's so many things there, so many dynamics that can speak to us and provide us with help and with guidance. And I trust that this story has given you some things to think about concerning your own future, your own life. A lot of times, a short-term bad decision will bear fruit. And you're going to say, see, look what God's done. I got a city. Saul's not chasing me. We're safe and we're secure. He got what he wanted. Relief from the pressure. But it wasn't God's will. It didn't foster his future and destiny. God had to insert himself, kind of bail him out of that situation and work circumstantially to bring a situation about where David could be anointed to be king. So let's bow our heads with that. And the objective here is to challenge your thinking about your life, your future, your destiny, what God has for you. And as our heads are bowed, you're not destined to be a king of Israel, but you have a future. And the decisions that you make now are very critical, and there are going to be seasons of pressure where a bad decision is going to look good to you. Imagine David aligning with the Philistines, moving into their territory, accepting a city, and then lining up with their army to fight against Israel. It's a catastrophe in the making. But to David, it all looked good. He's defending it. When they kicked him out of the army, he said, What have I done? I want to fight against your enemies, which were his brethren. It's all incredibly chaotic. But to this man, in this desperate circumstance, it looks like a very good idea. It's very hard to talk disciples out of what they think is a good idea. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes, God didn't prevent David from aligning with the Philistines. He allowed him to go. I think he learned his lessons. He had many battles going forward with the Philistines after he was king. So I think he learned his lesson, and sometimes disciples have to learn the hard way. You can't talk them out of a bad decision. And it's troubling to watch a disciple or a king, a future king, make a bad decision and then talk about what a great thing that bad decision is. Look at what has happened since I've made this decision. I don't have pressure anymore. The blessings are here for me to enjoy, and so forth and so on. So you've got to be very careful. The objective of life is to protect the interests of your calling and destiny. Sometimes that will require you to sacrifice short-term benefit, because that short-term benefit is not in the interest of your calling. Father, I pray right now that this circumstance in David's life would speak to our hearts. Let us all give consideration to the future and destiny that you have, Lord God. Let it never leave the landscape, whether it's a call to preach or a call to be a pillar, an example, a testimony in our church. Let us always put the interests of your will first and foremost, above all else, Lord. And we thank you in Jesus' name. All right, amen. Let's open it up. If you have any questions or comments. I thought about the episode in the cave when David cut the corner of Saul's garment. Remember his being chased. Saul has a 3,000-man army. He goes into the cave to go to the bathroom. He's defenseless. David's men are within eye shot of him, along with David, and they say, kill him, get him. Now's your opportunity. Now's your chance. And he snuck up, cut the corner of his garment, and felt a conviction about that. How dare I touch the Lord's anointed? And so there's all sorts of lessons there. And I also thought about the episode of David wanting to kill Nabal because Nabal rejected David's overtures. David had protected the interests of Nabal through the winter months. And then when he goes to ask him for a return of that favor, Nabal dismisses his men, so he mounts. He's going to go kill Nabal and all of his male servants, and Abigail intervenes on her husband's behalf and prevents David from possibly making a big mistake. Who's to say whether David wouldn't be killed, or some turn of events could happen with that kind of situation. So, you know, there's other leadership circumstances in a lot of these episodes in David's life during the fugitive period. So maybe next time you read through that in your Bible reading, you'll see what I mean about how interesting and inspiring those circumstances are. So somebody here with a question or a comment, something you want to add to what we've discussed here today? Anybody at all? Yeah.
I just wanted to say something that I noticed as we were talking about this, is that when David was really focused on security and making sure that he was out from under the pressure, that led him, like you were talking about, to line up with the Philistines and thinking about the episode in the cave where he was so convicted, how can I raise my hand against the Lord's anointed? Fast forwarding to where he was aligned with the Philistines, and he was incensed that he wasn't allowed to take up arms against the Lord's anointed. So when you're seeking security or your own short-term gain, that oftentimes leads you to have a 180 flip on what was once so ingrained and such a deep conviction for you.
You know, it's one bad decision after another. Now, David would never at first align with the Philistines, but once he's in their territory and he's benefiting from Achish's generosity by giving him a city, he gets kind of inculcated with the culture of the Philistines. He's interacting with the king. He's there in their land. And so it's one bad decision after another. His alliance with him to go into battle against Israel was made when he's there. It was kind of a secondary and the third and the fourth bad decision down the road. So you're right. It's a good analysis of that. One bad decision leads to another worse decision, right? All right. Okay, good. Ernie.
You know, I mean, it's amazing all the things that God helped not to happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if he would have gone in and Jonathan would have died, oh my gosh. I mean, the love that they had for each other, how can he have forgiven himself?
Yeah.
You know, secondly, God kept that Philistine general from saying, wait a minute here, isn't this the guy that killed many of our family members? We got him here. We got him surrounded. We got him overpowered. Kill him.
Yeah.
And lastly is, many times we Christians, we don't appreciate when a sinner corrects us. And, they're just a sinner. What do they know? And thank God that here you had this sinner say, what are you doing here? Get out of here. You don't belong here, you know? And so sometimes God uses a donkey or a sinner against us.
Very good. Yeah. Somebody else. George.
You know, Pastor, listening puts me in a, in a position where even in Friday's Bible study, when they mentioned that Jesus Christ was, I believe it was the Garden of Olives. Is that correct? Before the crucifixion.
Yeah, I guess
he was pressured. That was the most time he was pressured, and that's how olive produces oil. I believe that's what the Bible study was about. You know, it's in the times of pressure that God squeezes everything inside of you, and that's the time when we make, you know, when we make bad decisions, pressure, and you're looking for the way out. And it seems that David did the right things in the beginning. He didn't want to hurt Saul, but it's amazing how pressure can change that.
Yeah.
And pressure from, you know, many times in life, you think it's, I don't know, in my life I'm thinking it's easy to blame the devil for the pressure, but the reality is I believe sometimes God puts us against the wall and he pressures us just to see what we do or what we say or how we react. And, you know, it's just amazing the things we do. But if we understand that as we go through life and the pressures that God puts in front of us, it's basically a father teaching his son, you know, how to become a man. And you know, we kind of avoid it. We don't want to go through it. But it's amazing how it's at those times that if you surrender and you allow God to do what He wants to do in your life, and you just do what you can do with whatever the situation is, amazing things happen. You know, doors that weren't open somehow open, and you know, and you, it's like, it's amazing. You know, it's the pressure that, man, makes our heads want to blow up.
It skews your thinking. You know, just an example would be, let's say you earn a good salary, you've got money coming in, you don't have debts, you get paid, and you only need, let's say, 50 or 60% of that paycheck to meet the needs for that week or that month. Tithing's easy. But what if when you get paid, you need 50% more than what you got paid to meet your obligations? A lot of people take the tithe out of the equation first. Right?
That's the
So, and again, we rationalize that, we justify that, rather than first out, and then we'll deal with the 90%. We'll make it stretch. We'll make phone calls. We'll make arrangements or something. A lot of people fail right there. And that's just one example. There are a lot of other life situations where, in some circumstances, obedience is easy, no problem. But other circumstances, it's a lot more challenging because of the pressures of life. Amen. Somebody else, Manny.
That's I really the pressures you had in London. So you would say sticking it out is, I mean, right? You can say that all the pressures that you went through in London, wanting to quit, that is something in your character. Here you are now, and you got a boatload more, or not the same, but just the leadership. Can you tell us what that did? I mean,
Well, dynamics certainly change.
but I guess what I'm trying to say is what you went through to where you're at now, how it helps you, how it's helping you to handle what you got now.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's like when you're weightlifting, you don't start with 400 pounds, you start with 20, and you work your way up. It's kind of like that in life and in ministry. Anybody who grows in ministry, it requires a faithfulness at this level. You know, there's so many dynamics to pioneering, so many different features to it. You know, it's completely hands-on. You have a relationship with everyone in the church, and they're totally dependent on that relationship, even more so. People don't like it necessarily when I say this, but I teach pastors, pioneer pastors, that people are going to come to church because of you. They have to like you. They have to have some kind of, they have to want to, you know, see you and interact. And so that's how you have to build a church. It's built around your relationship with those people. As the church grows, they're going to come because of relationships with other people they develop and their relationship with Christ. They have to be born again. And I'm not saying it's all relationship with the pastor, and only that. There has to be a conversion experience that helps it along. But sometimes if you're working toward that, for example, somebody's interested, they like your preaching, they like the anointing, there's something about it, you have to have a relationship with that person. And so I think the working in that small arena does contribute to being able to function at a larger level. And you're always looking, when you're pioneering, you're always looking for that first disciple that you can begin to give responsibility to. The keys to the building, get the building set and ready for church services and so forth, things like that. And then can you follow up on this individual? I mean, there are pastors that have been out for 5 years don't have that yet. They're still having to unlock the door, you know, all the follow-up. So you have to be able to make disciples, hands-on. In this setting, now I do that in these kind of settings. My discipleship is not the personal, you know, interaction that it was when I was pioneering. but I disciple through the ministry. This setting here, church services, you hear me preach, the level of accountability that you have when you're in ministry, those sorts of dynamics. And then Pastor Glenn, Pastor Ernie do, a lot of it here. They are able to project my spirit and their own, and they have a lot more, I would say, hands-on relational interaction and so forth, just because of how ministry develops and grows. So it's a growth. You don't end up here first. I remember a guy came out of Tucson, a disciple, and he was telling everyone he was going to run 200 people by the end of 1 year. That's what he was saying. Big mistake, run out doing that. And he never ran 20, I think. So start small, faithful there, things grow, develop, God's able to give you more. All right, somebody else. All right, Augie.
The focus is David and how, it turns out good for him, but you think it didn't turn out good for everybody. You have the high priest. All the men of God were slaughtered because of David's decision.
Yeah. And
it's terrifying, what your life can produce, along with good things and blessing and all that. There's a whole array of stuff that happened. The high priest, the son that got away, that lined up with David, eventually, as he became king, that high priest took part of the rebellion against David. He ended up getting exiled, and you wonder, would any of these things have happened if David wouldn't have made those choices? And that's one of the terrifying things that I've seen over on my own life, even serving God, decisions I've made, and I see the fallout of
yeah, at a smaller scale, granted, but when David numbered the children of Israel, he chose as punishment the plague. 70,000 people died because of his sin and his bad decisions. So the lesson there is our lives affect others. And again, it's very frustrating for me as a pastor, watch men make bad decisions. Sometimes they lead their family into the teeth of danger. Sometimes their decisions demoralize their friends and their brethren, or inspire their friends to make equally bad decisions. So you have to be very careful, because I think we're going to be held accountable not only for the choices we make in life, but how it impacted others. Everyone's going to have to stand before God, give an account of their life. They're not going to be able to say, well, I blew it because he made a bad decision. I made a bad decision. You have to answer for yourself. But I think God is going to hold us accountable for how we influence people, for good or bad. Rick, do you have anything?
Yeah. I think one of the key verses here in the last chapter, 30, verse 6, it says, but David strengthened himself in the Lord.
Yeah.
And I think that's really key, because a lot of times we find ourselves in those situations with a lot of discouragement and despair. We find the prodigal son. Even Paul had phases of despair and discouragement in his life. But here we find David strengthening himself in the Lord. And a key thought is that failure is not final. Someone said that failure is an event, not a person. And I think maybe preached that before as well. But I think
his men are turning on him. So I think that probably opened his eyes a little bit. They are standing in a pile of ashes in Ziklag because of his leadership. He's led them there. His decisions are now coming to bear on his life. And so that probably is what got him on his knees, encouraged himself in the Lord, got a hold of God again. Yeah.
All these illustrations made me think of the devil's peace offering. They wanted to give David a city, and like godly men sometimes are offered good jobs that are out of the will of God. Jesus, when he was pressured and tempted in the wilderness, they offered him the kingdoms. Samson, devil's peace offering was the women, but yet Samson and David, they still had that fight in them, and they called on God one more time, just one more fight, just one more round, and they're able to recover.
Well, shortcuts are attractive, especially in this culture and generation. As a matter of fact, you mentioned Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. Everything the devil offered him was going to be his. right? Bread, kingdoms of the world, authority, dominion. But there had to be a cross. And so the devil always can offer shortcuts to blessing, but the reality is that sometimes you end up sacrificing your destiny when you make those kind of choices, unless you do as David did, which is come to himself. All right, let's finish with that. Let's stand. We have our meeting at 9. We're in the 9th week of our Sunday school on the God of guidance, and we're going to have one more week after today with that. Then we shift gears in another direction. So we have a great day today. This morning's sermon is going to be a deliverance type of message, and tonight will be a little bit of a discipleship type of message. So deliverance from the spirit of rejection this morning and the goal-oriented life for tonight. So we'll have a great day today. Let's be in prayer, get a hold of God, call upon his power and authority and dominion to prevail. So let's worship, thank God, and then Ernie Lopez is going to close us in prayer. Father, we thank you for your